Some stories are better heard with someone else. But you're here alone. Welcome to Don't Listen Alone. This is 100% ad-free, just you and whatever comes next. Drop your location and the time before we begin. Now, listen carefully. Not everything you hear is part of the story. It all started when my family moved into an apartment near my school, and at first there was nothing strange about it at all. Nothing that would make you think that one day we would be talking about spirits or haunted things connected to that place. The apartment looked decent and beautiful for us, especially considering our situation at that time. It was not very big, but it felt just right for our family. The paint on the walls was still fresh, the tiles on the floor were smooth and shiny, and the doors and windows looked new. The stairs going up from the front door were not very wide, but they were sturdy, and there was a simple metal railing that my grandmother liked to hold onto whenever she went up or down. The kitchen was small but functional, with a sink placed near a wall that had a small window. That window was not big enough for a person to pass through. It was really just large enough for a cat to squeeze in if it wanted to explore. We had a tiny living room space between the sink and the stairs, where we put our sofa and a small table, and beside the front door was the restroom. When we met the landlady, whose name was Ms. Viol, she told us proudly that the apartment was new and that we were the first ones to live on the third side of the building. She made it sound like we were lucky, like we were starting fresh in a place with no history, no problems, no old memories left by other families. At that time I believed her fully and felt happy that we had a house that was both near my school and nice to look at. For a while life there really felt ordinary and normal. I would wake up, go to school, come home, watch television, help with chores, and sleep in my room without thinking about any strange shadows or sounds. But things started to change and became cold and unsettling when my baby sister was born. My mom gave birth to my baby sister at exactly 12 midnight in the month of September 2005. The fact that she was born at midnight already felt a bit mysterious to me, because people always say strange things about babies born at that hour. But at that time I was just excited to finally have a little sister. My mother and baby sister stayed in the hospital for about a week after the birth, and we would visit them, bring food, and talk about how things would be when they finally came home. I imagined holding my sister, hearing her cry, seeing her tiny hands move. When they came home after that week, we were all busy adjusting. There were baby things everywhere, like bottles, blankets, and diapers. My grandmother was helping my mother a lot, carrying the baby, singing to her, walking slowly around the house while holding her close. For a short time, everything still seemed fine, just a little more tiring and noisy because of the baby, but nothing more than that. I continued with my school life and tried to be a helpful older sibling. Then, about a week after they had returned from the hospital, something happened that I can still see clearly in my mind. One day I saw my grandmother carrying my baby sister, slowly going downstairs from the upper floor. I remember that I was somewhere near the bottom of the stairs at the time, close enough to see her feet move carefully from step to step. She was not young anymore, so she always held the railing tightly when going up or down, especially when carrying the baby. The light in the stair area was not very bright. It was a bit dim, so shadows tended to stretch along the walls and steps. As she moved down, I watched her like I normally did, ready to help if she needed something, and then suddenly she said in a panicked voice, "Oh God, someone help me!" The way she said it was not like when she jokes or pretends to be tired. It was full of fear, and it made my heart jump. Without thinking twice I hurried to attend to her. I rushed toward the stairs, ready to help her with the baby, and as I looked up to see what was wrong, my eyes were drawn to something that made my whole body freeze for a moment. Behind my grandmother, right at her back, I saw an odd-looking dark human figure. It was not solid like a regular person, but it was not completely transparent either. It was more like a thick shadow shaped like a person, pressed very close to her, as if it was pushing against her back. I could not see its face clearly, just a dark form that followed her shape and leaned into her body. It gave me a strong feeling that it wanted her to fall down the stairs. For a second I could not breathe properly because the sight was so unexpected that my mind could not accept it right away. Then, as she gripped the railing firmly and struggled to keep her balance, I hurriedly climbed a few steps, took hold of her arm, and helped her make it down safely. My main focus at that moment was to protect the baby and my grandmother, so I forced myself to move even though I was scared. When we finally reached the bottom of the stairs and she stepped onto the floor, she was still breathing hard, holding my sister tight. She told me that she felt something pushing behind her back, that it was not like she simply slipped on her own, but like there was a force leaning on her, trying to shove her forward. She said that the feeling scared her so much that she grabbed the railing with all her strength and called out to God and for help. I listened to her and nodded, but I did not tell her about the odd figure I had seen behind her, because I did not want her to be even more frightened. My grandmother was already worried about many things, especially the baby and my mother's health, and I knew that if I told her I saw a dark figure pressing on her back, it would stay in her mind and make her afraid to even use the stairs again. So I kept that part to myself, even though inside me the image of that figure stayed very clear. After that incident with my grandmother and the shadow-like figure on the stairs, I started to feel a little different about the apartment, but for a while nothing big happened again. I tried to convince myself that maybe my eyes had played a trick on me, that maybe the lighting and the angle made it look like something was there when it was really just a shadow from the wall or the railings. Life went on. I went to school, we took care of the baby, and my grandmother continued to move around the house, though sometimes I noticed she held the railing even more tightly going up and down. Then, after a few months had passed, I saw something again, and this time it was even more confusing because it looked exactly like a normal person at first. I remember that day clearly. I was sitting beside my baby sister's crib in the living room area. She was either sleeping or lying there quietly, and I was keeping her company, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, listening to her soft breathing. The TV might have been off, and the atmosphere in the house felt calm. From where I sat, I had a clear view of the kitchen sink area, which, as I mentioned before, was near a wall with a small window. That little window did not show a big view, just a slice of the outside, and sometimes a cat from the neighborhood would squeeze through that opening and walk along the sink or the counter. That day, as I sat beside the crib, I suddenly noticed someone standing near the sink. It was a man. His skin tone was brown, like someone who worked outside under the sun a lot, and he was wearing a black sleeveless undershirt, a black sandal, and black shorts. That clothing combination was very familiar to me because my father had a set of black sandal and black shorts that he liked to wear at home when he wanted to be comfortable, especially on hot days. So when I first saw the man standing there, my mind immediately concluded that it must be my dad. Because of that assumption, I did not react in any frightened way. I thought, "Oh, Dad is just standing there near the sink," and I ignored him for a moment, focusing again on my baby sister. There was nothing strange about seeing your own father near the sink. However, after about 5 seconds had passed, something made me look back toward the sink. Maybe it was just natural curiosity, or maybe something in my mind felt that something was off. When I turned my head and looked again, the man was gone. He had just disappeared. There was no sound of footsteps, no sound of a door or the small window opening, and no movement that would suggest he had walked away quickly. One moment he had been there, clear as any person, and the next moment the space near the sink was completely empty. My heart started to beat a little faster. I thought about the layout again. The sink was near the wall, and the window was much too small for any adult to pass through. The stairs going up were near the front door, and beside them was the restroom. Between the sink and the stairs was the living room, where I was sitting. There was no way for someone to walk from the sink to the stairs without me seeing them cross my field of view. I had not seen any movement. It was as if the person had simply vanished into thin air. That made the experience feel very weird, and a chill ran through my body as I realized that whoever or whatever I had seen may not have been my father at all. After that, I became more aware of the feeling that we were not alone in the apartment, even when we were supposed to be the only ones living there. Time went on, and my baby sister grew. When she turned 2 years old, we had a short celebration inside our house. We did not invite a lot of people, only our relatives, because it was meant to be a simple family gathering. Still, the house was full of voices and laughter that night. There was food on the table, some decorations, and of course the small cake with candles for my sister. We sang, ate, talked, and took pictures. For a while the house felt very alive, and I almost forgot about any strange shadows or disappearing men. After 9 in the evening, our relatives started to go home one by one. We said our goodbyes at the door, waved as they walked away, and once they were gone the house slowly went quiet again. We cleaned the place, put away the dirty dishes, and packed up the leftover food. Eventually everyone got tired and went to sleep in their rooms. Later that night, I woke up around 12 midnight because I needed to go to the restroom. I was fully awake, not half asleep, because my bladder was really bothering me. I got out of bed and headed toward the restroom, walking through the dim house. The light in the hallway was off, but some weak light from outside the window or from the street probably gave a faint glow. As I approached the area where the restroom door was, I suddenly saw someone run toward the restroom. The figure moved quickly, as if in a hurry to get inside. The movement was so natural that my first thought was that it must have been my mother. It made sense to think that, because who else would be up and using the restroom at that hour? The figure went in, and I heard or felt that the door was closed. So I waited outside, thinking that I would just let my mom finish and then I would go in. I waited for a long time, maybe around 30 minutes. During that time, I shifted my weight from one foot to the other and tried my best not to pee in my underwear. The longer I waited, the more urgent my need became. At some point I started to feel annoyed and confused. I wondered why my mom was taking so long in there. Finally, when I felt that I really could not hold it anymore, I decided that I had no choice but to knock or open the door carefully. I told myself that maybe she had forgotten to lock it, or maybe something was wrong. I insisted on opening the door because I was desperate. When I turned the knob and pushed the door open, I was shocked to see that there was no one inside. The bathroom was empty. The light was off, the tiles were dry, there was no sound of water running, and no sign that someone had just used it. That moment sent a chill through my entire body. I knew I was truly awake because I could feel every sensation clearly, from the coldness of the floor under my feet to the pressure in my bladder. I am not lying when I say that I saw a figure run toward the restroom and go in. But when I opened the door, there was nobody. Over time, similar strange incidents also happened to other members of my family, not just to me. My sister, even when she was still young, would sometimes react in ways that made us think she saw or felt something we could not see. My uncle, who visited often, also experienced odd things in that apartment. There were times when we would all be sitting quietly and then suddenly hear the sound of glass crashing in the living room, as if a glass or mirror had fallen and shattered into pieces on the floor. We would jump up and run to check, expecting to see broken shards everywhere, but when we arrived there was nothing out of place. Sometimes, however, our mirrors really would break suddenly, especially when my sister looked into them. She would stare at her reflection like any normal child, and then, without warning, a mirror would crack or fall, leaving us stunned. It is hard to explain these incidents in a way that sounds believable, but I am telling this exactly as it happened. There were nights when we would all get high fevers for no clear reason. We would feel weak and hot, but there were no obvious signs of infection, no colds, no coughs, nothing that a doctor could easily explain. The pattern of fevers sometimes made us feel like something in that house was draining our energy, or trying to pull us closer to its own world. It sometimes felt like the spirits, if that is what they were, wanted us to become like them, to suffer or to fade away. Because of everything that kept happening, we eventually felt we needed to know more about the history of the apartment, so we tried to gather information from neighbors and other people in the area. That was when we learned that the house we were living in had a darker past than we first thought. We found out that our unit had been haunted and abandoned by a previous family who lived there before us, a family known to have serious problems with alcohol. People said that this alcoholic family had experienced many troubles and strange things while living there, that they had fights, illnesses, and other misfortunes, and that at some point they decided to leave and never come back. It seemed that when we moved in, the place might not have been as fresh and new as we were told, at least not in a spiritual sense. Knowing this made many things start to make sense. It was as if the apartment had invisible scars from the past, and we were now feeling the effects. After a while, the combination of all these strange events and the heavy feeling in the house became too much for us. We had gotten to the point where we were constantly on edge, listening for unexplained sounds, watching for shadows, and worrying about sudden fevers or accidents. So my family made a decision. We moved to another house, hoping to leave behind whatever was attached to that place. When we moved out and settled into our new home, we noticed a big difference. The air felt lighter, the nights were calmer, and no more mirrors suddenly cracked when my sister looked into them. The fevers that came from nowhere stopped happening as often, and we started to feel like ourselves again. It felt like we had lost the spirits that used to bother us. As of now, no one lives in that apartment we left behind. The third side that we once considered our home has remained empty. People say that dead animals have been found there, as if even creatures that wander into that space do not stay alive for long. When I think back on everything that happened in that apartment, the shadow pushing my grandmother on the stairs while she carried my baby sister, the man in black near the sink who vanished without a sound, the invisible person who ran into the restroom, the crashing glass sounds, the mirrors breaking when my sister stared into them, the unexplained fevers, and finally the stories about the previous alcoholic family who abandoned the place, I cannot help but feel that the house itself was carrying something dark inside it. I do not know exactly what those things were or what they wanted from us, but I am grateful that we finally left and that now, in our new home, the only kind of cold we feel is the natural chill of the night air, not the icy, invisible touch of something we cannot see. This happened a few years ago when I was still in college, and even now, when I think about it, I can still feel that same strange mix of confusion, fear, and curiosity that I felt back then. Like a part of that night is still stuck in my memory, playing over and over. At that time I was studying in Laguna, and our campus was more than 100 years old, so as you can imagine there were a lot of ghost stories that students liked to share, especially at night when people gathered in dorm rooms or canteens and whispered about haunted buildings and old classrooms where lights turned on by themselves or footsteps were heard in empty corridors. Laguna was about a 2-hour drive from home, and because it was too tiring and impractical to travel every day, I decided to stay in a dormitory near the school. The dorm I picked was inside a compound, and inside that compound there were several units where students lived. My unit was a studio-type room which I shared with 3 other schoolmates. For simplicity I will call them Roommate 1, Roommate 2, and Roommate 3. We were not close friends at first, but because we lived together, shared the same small space, and saw each other every morning and every night, we slowly grew more comfortable with each other and learned about each other's habits and personalities. The studio-type unit was not very big, but it was enough for the 4 of us. There were bunk beds placed against the walls, a small table where we sometimes studied or ate, and a narrow space in the middle for moving around. Our things were packed into the cupboards, under the beds, or in boxes at the corners. You could tell that the building itself was not new. The floor tiles had some scratches on them, the windows rattled a little when the wind blew, and the paint on the walls had small marks from being touched by many hands over the years. At night, when the lights were off, the corners of the room always looked darker than they needed to be, and the sounds from the corridors outside, like footsteps, muffled voices or the clang of the gate, felt louder than during the day. We had a gate at the entrance of the compound that made a distinct chime whenever someone entered or left. It was almost comforting in a way, because you always knew when someone came in late or went out early, and yet that sound would also play a role in what happened to me later. In our first few nights together, we stayed up late talking, the way new roommates often do. We shared stories about our families, our high schools, our crushes, our fears about college life, and of course the ghost stories from campus that upperclassmen had told us. Someone always had some tale about a lady in white walking near one of the old buildings, or a crying sound coming from the restroom near the library, or a janitor seeing a student in a closed classroom when no one was supposed to be there. We would scream or laugh and then look at each other to see who was the most scared. Even though the stories gave us goosebumps, there was something fun about those late-night talks. We would lie on our bunks or sit on the floor, wrapped in blankets, the lights dim or sometimes completely off, and the glow from someone's phone or a small lamp flickering in one corner. Because we had bunk beds, and because I can be lazy when I am tired, there were nights when I did not feel like climbing up to my bunk. One of those nights became the center of this story. That night, after a long day of classes and some homework and chatting with my roommates, I grew so lazy that I did not want to climb up to the top bunk where I usually slept. Instead, I pulled my sheets down and decided I would sleep on the floor. The floor was not exactly comfortable, but with a decent blanket and pillow, it was enough, and in a way I liked the feeling of lying close to the ground, almost like camping. Roommate 1 felt the same. She was also too lazy to climb up and said she would sleep beside me on the floor. So we laid our sheets side by side in the open space, while roommate 2 and roommate 3 stayed in their bunks. The lights were turned off, leaving only that faint light from the outside street or a small bit of glow from some electronic device in the room. The air was cool, and I could hear the soft breathing of my roommates as everyone slowly settled into their sleeping positions. As I lay there on the floor, wrapped in my blanket, I felt my body relax and my thoughts drift. There was that familiar feeling of slowly slipping into sleep, when the sounds around you become softer, and your mind starts mixing reality with dreams. I could hear someone shifting in bed, a quiet cough, maybe a dog barking faintly from somewhere outside the compound. I was at that in-between stage, not fully asleep but not fully awake either, when suddenly I heard someone knock on our door. The knock was not very loud, but it was clear, a solid tapping that did not sound like something accidental, like a bag falling or furniture being moved. It sounded like someone deliberately knocking. Then I heard a voice asking if I was still awake, and if I could open the door. The strange thing was that the voice was calling me by my name. The way it said my name felt personal, like the person outside knew me well. In that moment everything was blurry in my head. I did not know if what was happening was a dream or something real. It felt like my body was heavy and slow, but my ears were working clearly. So when the voice asked if I was still awake and if I could open the door, I answered, half in a murmur, that I was still awake. I remember saying in our language, "Sandali lang babangan na ko," which means, "Wait, I'll get up." I thought to myself that maybe it was one of our neighbors or someone who needed help, or maybe a friend who had come to visit late. The voice kept asking me to open the door, and kept calling me by my name, almost insistently. I tried to move my body. In my mind, I felt that I was pushing myself up from the floor, pulling off the blanket, and walking toward the door. I saw myself stand up, felt the coldness of the floor under my bare feet, and imagined my hand reaching for the doorknob. But just as I was opening the door in my mind, I heard the voice again, still asking me to open the door, still calling me. That was the exact moment when something felt wrong, and I realized that I hadn't really moved at all. My body was still lying on the floor, and I had not actually stood up. It was like my mind had dreamed that I had gotten up, but my physical body stayed in the same place, under the blanket, eyes closed or maybe half open. I could not even be sure. The experience repeated itself several times. I would hear the voice at the door saying my name, and asking if I was awake, asking me to open up. I would answer that I was still awake and that I would get up. I would feel myself getting up, walking nearer to the door, my hand almost turning the knob. Then, suddenly, I would realize that it was only happening in some strange dreamlike level of my consciousness, and that my real body had not moved at all. It was like being trapped between two layers of reality, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not fully cross to the one where I was truly standing and opening the door. This cycle went on for what felt like a long time. I did not know if it was a few minutes or half an hour because time felt different in that state. The voice outside seemed patient but also a little annoyed, repeating my name and insisting that I open the door. At some point, though, the situation changed. Instead of calling directly to me, I heard that same voice talking to someone else, as if there were two people outside our unit now. The tone changed from direct calling to more of a conversation. I heard the voice say, "Walla, tilag na yen," which means, "No, she's already asleep." There was a hint of resignation in that sentence, like the person had decided to stop trying to get my attention because they believed I was asleep and would not answer. After that, just a few seconds later, I heard the chime of the gate at the entrance of the compound, that familiar metal sound it made whenever someone opened it and went out. The sound of the gate somehow made everything feel more real, because the gate chime was a physical, mechanical noise that could only happen if someone really passed through it. It made me imagine that whoever had been at our door now decided to leave the compound. After that, things went quiet again. The next thing I remember is waking up properly. The morning light was already coming in through the window, and I felt that heavy, slow feeling that comes after a deep sleep or a confusing night. When I looked around our room, roommate 2 and roommate 3 were already gone, probably off to their early classes. Roommate 1 was still there, but she seemed normal, not like someone who had been disturbed in the night. She did not mention anything, did not ask me if I was okay or if I had been talking. So I started to think that maybe everything that happened was just a strange dream. I told myself that I must have mixed up real sounds and dream images, and that the knocking, the voice, the feeling of trying to get up, and even the sound of the gate might have all been part of a sleep experience, and not something happening in the physical world. The whole thing felt blurry in my mind, like a memory that fades as you think about it. I continued with my day as usual. I washed up, got dressed, grabbed something quick to eat, and went to my classes. The sun was bright, people were walking around the campus, chatting and laughing, and everything felt so normal that it was hard to connect it with the eerie feeling I had during the night. I tried to focus on lectures, on group work, on the usual rush of college life. A part of me still thought about what happened, but I pushed it aside with the excuse that it was just a dream. When I got home to the dorm that afternoon, however, the strange experience came back to confront me head-on. I had barely settled down inside the unit when roommate 2 approached me and asked me about last night. The way she said it made my heart skip a beat. She did not sound like she was about to talk about some silly gossip. She sounded serious and a bit confused. I looked at her and asked what she meant. Then she told me that while she was sleeping last night, she heard someone murmuring. It sounded like someone talking at sleep, or maybe like whispers. She was not completely sure if the voice she heard was mine or coming from someone else. She said that at one point she wondered if there were other voices with it, like someone was answering or talking back, but she couldn't be sure because she was half asleep. She did not get up to check, but the sound stayed in her mind. As she told me this, the blurry memory from the night before suddenly felt sharp and clear. That was the moment when it truly hit me that what happened might not have been just a regular dream. If I had only dreamed everything, then why did roommate 2 hear murmuring and possibly other voices? Why did she feel that something strange was happening while we were all supposed to be sleeping? The idea that something or someone had been at our door calling my name, trying to get me to open, and that my own voice and the voice from outside could somehow be heard by someone else in the room, even faintly, made my skin crawl. I did not want to jump to conclusions though, so I tried to check things logically first. I immediately went to ask some of our neighbors in the compound if any of them had knocked at our unit last night, or if someone had been looking for me. I asked them casually, trying not to sound scared or too eager, but everyone I asked said no, they had not passed by our door, and no one had asked them anything about me. Some of them had been asleep early, some were out late, but none of them had gone to our unit at that time. The answers from our neighbors made the situation feel even stranger. Because nobody could enter the compound without a key, and only tenants had keys to the gate, I also decided to ask the guard who watched over the entrance. Usually, if someone from the outside visited us, they would have to wait at the gate, or the guard would need to know who they were and who they were visiting. So I went to the guard and politely asked if anyone had come to look for me the previous night, or if any visitors came into the compound at the time when I heard the knocking. He shook his head and said that no one came the previous night looking for me or anyone else, as far as he remembered. The night had been quiet, and there had been no unusual visitors. Hearing that from the guard, along with the neighbor's answers and roommate two's story about hearing murmurs, left me with a deep, unsettled feeling. If no one had come in, and no one had knocked from among the people we knew, then who had been at our door? Who was calling my name so persistently and asking me to open? And more importantly, what would have happened if I had actually managed to get up properly and open that door? I could not stop thinking about that last question. There was a part of me that was grateful that something had kept me from moving, that I seemed trapped in that state where my mind thought I was standing, but my body refused to obey. Maybe that strange paralysis, that inability to fully wake up and move, was some sort of protection keeping me from doing something dangerous, like opening the door to something that was not human. That weekend, when I went home to my family, I told my mom about the whole story. I described everything in detail, from the feeling of falling asleep on the floor, the knocking, the voice calling my name, the repeated attempts to get up, the moment when the voice said, "Walla, tulug na yen," and the sound of the gate chime, all the way to roommate 2 hearing murmurs and the neighbors and guards saying no one came. My mom listened quietly, not making fun of me, not dismissing me right away, just listening and absorbing what I was telling her. When I finished, I waited for her reaction. She sighed and said that maybe someone or something was looking after me, or perhaps just looking for me, but that I should never open doors for such calls, especially at night, and especially if the situation feels strange or if I am not fully sure that the one calling is a real person I know. Her answer was simple, but it stayed with me. After that experience, I became more careful about late-night knocks and strange voices. Whenever I stayed in the dorm and heard something unusual at night, I would stop and think twice before getting up or answering. Maybe it was just another student who forgot their key or a friend playing a prank, but after that one night, I could not shake the feeling that sometimes, the knock on the door, the voice calling your name, might not be from someone you want to let in. When I think back to that day, I always start with my grandmother, my mother's mother, because in my childhood she was almost like my shadow, or maybe I was hers. Following her everywhere she went like a small, quiet tail that never came off. She was the one who took care of me when I was young, the one who brought me along to the market, to church, to relatives' houses, to every small errand that became a little adventure in my eyes. I hardly remember being left behind when she went anywhere. If she stood up to go out, I would stand up too without even needing to be called. That afternoon was no different. We were going to my aunt's place in Sangandan, Quezon City, and as usual I just went along, holding on to her presence, feeling safe simply because she was there. The trip itself is blurry now, but some parts of that street are still sharp in my memory even after all these years, as if certain pieces of that day were pinned in my mind and refused to fade. I remember the road that led to my aunt's house, and how before you turn into the small dead-end road, there was this huge tree on the left side of the main street. Up to now I am not sure if it was an acacia tree or a bolete tree. Sometimes when I picture it in my mind it looks like an acacia with wide branches spreading like a big umbrella, and other times the memory shifts, and it feels more like a bolete, with thicker roots and hanging parts that made it look older and more mysterious. In reality it might have been one or the other, but in my mind it became a mix of both, a very big old tree that watched over that corner of the road. At that age I was not interested in trees, especially not in trying to identify them, so while adults might have noticed if it was bolete or acacia, I only knew that it was big and that we always passed it on the way in. You had to walk or drive past that tree on the left before turning into a narrow dead-end road, also on the left side, and once you entered that little road, it felt like you were going inside a small closed world that belonged to a few families only. Inside that blind alley there were only 3 houses, which made it easy to remember the layout even after so much time has passed. On one side stood my aunt's house, on the right as you walked in from the main street. On the left side there was another house that blocked the view back to the tree once you were farther inside, and at the very end of the road there was a 3-story house that always caught my attention as a child. That last house at the end had a balcony or veranda that I remember clearly, though if you asked me now whether the balcony was on the 2nd floor, the 3rd floor, or both, I honestly cannot say for sure. In my memory it seems to shift. Sometimes it feels like the veranda was on the third floor, high up and open to the sky, and other times I think maybe there was also one on the second floor. What I do know is that there was a balcony facing the entrance of that dead-end road, with railings where someone could stand and rest their elbows, looking out over the short stretch of space and toward the bigger street and that big tree beyond. As soon as we turned into that small road and started walking toward my aunt's house, I stopped thinking about the tree because it was no longer visible. The house on the left side blocked it, so if you were focused on what was in front of you, you simply did not see the tree anymore. And that was the case with me. I had no special interest in that tree, no fear and no attraction, so when it disappeared from view, it also disappeared from my thoughts. What did catch my eye at that moment was not the tree but the boy in the veranda of the 3-story house at the end of the road. As we walked deeper into the alley, I saw him clearly, standing there with his elbows resting on the metal railings, his face turned toward the direction of the main road, which also meant he was facing the general direction of that big tree outside, even though he was some distance away from it. It looked like he was staring at something beyond us, not at us. His gaze seemed fixed, calm, and distant, almost like he was watching something invisible on the path near the tree or even a point in the air above it. I was a child, so I did not read anything strange into his expression at that moment. To me he was simply a boy my age or near my age, standing in a balcony the way children sometimes do when they are bored or thinking or just watching life pass. I was vaguely looking at him without any strong feeling, not fear, not surprise, just that simple awareness that there was a boy up there, leaning on the railings and staring in one direction. My eyes slid from him to my aunt's doorway as we reached her house, and only then did my attention shift to the grown-ups. My aunt greeted us in a way that I can never forget, not because she was overly emotional or dramatic, but because the very first thing she said cut through the normal welcome you might expect from a relative, and went straight into something strange and heavy. Instead of saying hello or "You're here," or asking if we had eaten, she looked at me and said, "Don't play at the back of the house without wearing your slippers." Her tone was serious, almost like she was giving me a warning and not a simple piece of advice. Without waiting for my answer, she continued in a matter-of-fact voice. "Al died this morning because he stepped on a rusted nail a week or so ago while playing at the back and tetanus got him." That was her opening line to me that day. No soft warm welcome, just a direct explanation and a rule. Do not play in the back without slippers, because your playmate from next door died from stepping on a nail. For a moment I just stared at her, my young mind trying to connect the words that did not fit inside my head. Someone died? This morning? Playing at the back? From a nail? Tetanus? And the name she used, Al, felt like a name I should know, like she assumed I would immediately recognize who she was talking about. Confused, I asked her who Al was. "Who's Al?" I said, honestly trying to understand. To me at that moment, Al was just a name, not yet a face. My aunt looked at me with a tone of surprise in her reply, as if I was asking something obvious. "Al," she said again, this time describing him, "was your playmate next door." And she pointed out toward the 3-story house at the end of the road. She reminded me that he was the black boy with curly hair, and she described his appearance, pointing with her hand and using small details to help me remember. She said he was about the age of her son, my cousin, whose name was Jeffgard, a year younger than me, so in her mind it was natural that I should know who Al was, because he lived next door, and he was around our age and probably ran around that alley the way we did. As she spoke, my confusion grew stronger, like two different pictures in my mind were trying to occupy the same space at the same time and did not match. So I repeated the names slowly in my head. Al, the black boy with curly hair, next door, about our age. And as the description sank in, the image of the boy on the balcony snapped into place. "Yes," she confirmed when I repeated parts of her description. "Yes. As in yes, that is the boy, the one who died that very morning." But my mind refused to place him among the dead, because I had just seen him, solid and clear, only moments earlier. I answered her with growing insistence. "No, Auntie, he's there at the balcony." I told her I had seen him just before we entered her house. "I saw him just before we entered here," I said, and I added, "and he's still there," because in my mind the image of him had not yet faded. He was not a floating figure or a transparent shadow in my memory. He was a boy standing, elbows on the railings, staring down the road. He looked completely normal, not pale, not gray, not blurred, just like any child watching from a veranda. I tugged at my aunt's attention, asking her to come with me, to have a look and see what I had seen. I jerked her arm, trying to pull her outside, to show her that the boy she said was dead was actually right there, visible and alive in my young eyes. I wanted her to see him the way I did, so that the strange mismatch between her words and my sight would be erased. But she did not move. She did not follow me, she did not rush to the window or the door, did not even lean forward in curiosity. She simply ignored my plea, as if I was a child making up a story or insisting on something that adults did not need to pay attention to. She paid no heed, no matter how much I tried to convince her. At that time, I was too young to argue in a serious way, and there was this automatic barrier between a child's words and an adult's belief. It was as if my words bounced off an invisible wall that separated the world of children from the world of grown-ups. My aunt did not believe me, or maybe she did not even allow the possibility that I could be telling the truth, because in her mind the facts were already set. The boy, Al, had died that morning from tetanus after stepping on a nail. She had probably seen the family grieving or heard the story from reliable adults, maybe even seen the body. Those facts, for her, were stronger than whatever a small child said. I remember standing there, torn between two strong impressions. On one side was my clear memory of seeing the boy, solid and real, at the balcony just as we turned into the alley, elbows on the railings, eyes fixed in the direction of the big tree. On the other side were my aunt's words, explaining calmly that he had died that morning, and her refusal to even check outside when I tried to tell her he was there. At that age I did not have the words to express how strange that felt. I just knew deep inside that I had seen him, and that it had not been a dream or a trick of the light. He had not been floating, there was no eerie glow around him, no dramatic wind, no haunting voice. He was just there, like any normal child. If my aunt had not said anything about his death, I would have forgotten his face as soon as we moved inside the house and started playing or talking. But because she told me that he had died, that simple image of a boy on a balcony became something else, something that stayed with me for years, like a picture that refuses to fade no matter how much time passes. As I grew older, I read about things like near-death experiences, or unease. In some stories, especially ones involving children, there were descriptions of how a spirit or an angel would accompany the dying or recently dead child and allow them to visit their loved ones or familiar places one last time before they moved on to the light, as people like to call it. In those stories, the child would sometimes appear to family members or friends in a very normal way, as if they were healthy and alive, and only later would the family realize that the visit happened after the time of death. When I first came across those kinds of stories, my mind almost automatically connected them with what I had experienced as a child in Sangandan. I thought of that boy, Al, standing on the balcony, looking toward the big tree, while I was walking in with my grandmother. It made me wonder if what I saw that afternoon was something similar to those stories, perhaps a short visit, a last look, a final presence before he went on somewhere else. At the same time, I realized that unlike those stories where the child actively interacted with someone, smiling, speaking, touching a hand, this boy did not move toward us or call out. He was simply standing there, as if his attention was fixed on something else, and I happened to arrive at the exact moment when he was visible. For years, though, adults around me did not validate my story. In the moment itself, my aunt did not believe me, and as I grew older and shared the experience here and there, it was easy for people to brush it aside as a child's imagination, a confused memory, a misunderstanding of time. Maybe, they said, I saw him before he died and just mixed up the days. Maybe, they suggested, someone else was on the balcony and I only thought it was Al. Maybe the light and the distance played tricks on my eyes. It is always easy to explain things in that way, especially when you do not want to step into the uncomfortable idea that a dead child might have been standing on a balcony that afternoon. And I admit, there were times when I tried to convince myself that maybe I was wrong, that maybe the timeline was mixed up or my memory played with me. But every time I replayed the scene inside my head, the order of events remained the same. We walked past the big tree, turned into the dead-end road. I saw the boy on the veranda at the end of the road, clearly and without fear, and only after entering my aunt's house did I hear the news of his death that same morning from stepping on a nail. The shock I felt when those two things collided is also part of that memory, and that kind of shock does not usually come from something you only imagine. Children are often honest when they describe what they see, but because they are small and don't know better, adults sometimes treat their words like drawings on paper that can be folded and set aside. I thought a lot about that over the years. How many times had I, or other children, seen something real in our own way and been dismissed? How often do adults assume that a child is lying or imagining things simply because what the child says makes them uncomfortable? In my case, I genuinely saw the boy. I saw his curly hair, his dark skin, the way he leaned on the balcony railing. There was nothing ghostly about him in that instant. The only thing that turned him into a mystery was the information that he had already died. If my aunt had believed me enough to walk back out and look up at that balcony, what would she have seen, I sometimes wonder. Would he still have been there, or would he have vanished by then, leaving her with nothing but my words and a quiet alley? Maybe she did not want to risk that. Maybe not seeing anything would hurt her more. Or maybe she really, simply, did not believe me at all. Many years passed. My aunt and her family eventually moved from that place to another, and our lives went on. The big tree at the corner probably got cut down or surrounded by shops. The 3-story house might have been renovated or torn down. The little alley might have changed completely. Yet that one afternoon stayed alive in my memories. Every now and then something would remind me of it, a story on television about spirits, a book about unease, or simply passing a balcony where a child was leaning, and suddenly I would remember Al, the boy I did not really know but apparently was supposed to be my playmate. As I grew older, I also began to understand more about tetanus, about how a small injury like stepping on a rusted nail could bring such a deadly infection if it went untreated. When I was small, tetanus was just a word that adults used, a word tied to the warning, "Wear your slippers," and to a child's death. Later I realized how tragic it was, how something that might have been prevented ended a young life and left behind a family and neighbors who could only say, "Be careful," to other children afterward. It was only recently, though, many years after that incident and long after my aunt's family had moved away from that house, that I brought up the story with her again. We were talking about old times, about places we had lived, about strange things that happened when we were younger, and the memory of that afternoon came back to me clearly, as if it had been waiting for its turn to be told again. So I told her. I described how we walked in, how I saw the boy in the balcony, how she told me that Al had died that morning from tetanus after stepping on a nail, and how I insisted that he was still there on the veranda while she refused to come out and see. I told her how strongly that image stayed with me all those years, and how I always remembered it as the time I saw someone who should not have been there. This time, my aunt did not laugh or dismiss it like some adult listening to a child's imagination. She listened quietly, and I could see from her face that the memory of that boy, Al, and his death was still with her too. She had not forgotten him either. When I finished telling her exactly what I saw and how I had felt, she nodded slowly. There was no more. "You imagined it," or "You were mistaken." She believed me. Maybe time had softened her skepticism, or maybe as an older woman she had seen enough strange things herself to accept that some experiences do not fit into neat, simple explanations. All she said was that she now believed what I had been trying to tell her as a child, and hearing that from her, after so many years, felt like something inside me settled at last. It did not suddenly explain everything, it did not answer all the questions about what exactly I saw on that balcony that day, whether it was a spirit, a last visit, or some other mystery we do not have words for. But it gave some kind of closure to that younger version of me who had tugged at her arm, begging her to look, and who had been left unheard. In the end, I cannot say for sure what that moment really was, and I do not try to force an explanation anymore. What I know is simple. As a child, walking with my grandmother into a small dead-end road in Sangandan, Quezon City, I saw a boy standing on a balcony at the end of the road, elbows on the railings, staring in the direction of a big tree we had just passed. That boy was described to me moments later as someone who had died that same morning from tetanus after stepping on a rusty nail while playing at the back of the house. I knew in my heart that I had seen him exactly at that time, not before, not days earlier. No matter how much adults tried to suggest other explanations, that sequence remained clear in my mind. It is up to others to decide what they believe, but for me, that was the day I learned that sometimes you can see someone who is already gone, as solid and ordinary as if they were still alive, and that believing a child when they say, "I just saw him," might mean opening a small door to a world we do not fully understand but which sometimes touches ours in quiet, unforgettable ways. Me and my husband were staying at his brother's house in Tbilisi City, Cebu, and because of that I was right there in the area when the strong storm came and hit us. The wind was loud all day and all night, the rain was heavy, and you could hear the trees outside creaking and bending like they would break at any moment. Because of the storm, the electricity in the whole area went out. Some of the electric posts and lines were damaged and many trees had fallen on the wires, so there was no power in the neighborhood for almost 3 days. At night everything was really dark, not just inside the house but even outside on the street. There were no street lights, no lights from neighbors' windows, nothing. Only the weak light from candles or sometimes from a small flashlight made little patches of brightness in the middle of the dark, and the rest was just shadows. In that kind of quiet and darkness, every little sound felt louder and every little movement seemed more noticeable. So it was very easy for the mind to feel uneasy, especially for someone like me who gets scared easily when it is dark. My husband and his older brother both work as seamen, so they spend a lot of time away from home, sailing in different parts of the world. That time was special because it was the first time in a long while that their vacations happened at the same time, so they were both home together. Because of that, they made it like a small celebration every day. Almost every afternoon, when the sun was lower and the air got a bit cooler, they would sit outside or near the door, bring out some drinks, and have what they call a little drinking session. It became a daily routine while they were both there, and they enjoyed it a lot, talking about their work on the ship, the ports they had visited, the funny stories on board, and also some more serious things about life and family. Since there was no electricity and nothing much to do anyway during those brownout days, I and his older brother's wife sometimes joined them. We did not drink as much as they did, but we sat with them, ate the pulutan, and joined in the small talk. Pulutan is what we call the food that goes with the drinks, like fried fish, grilled meat, peanuts, or whatever small dish is served in the middle of the table. Even with the storm damage and the long power outage, those little gatherings gave us some feeling of normal joy, as if we were just on a simple vacation and not in the middle of a disaster area. On the night of November 9th, it was the same scene again. It was dark everywhere because of the brownout, and we only had candles and maybe one small flashlight to give some light. The air was heavy and a bit humid, but there was also that strange quiet that you feel after a storm, when the wind has calmed down, but everything still feels unsettled. My husband and his brother started their usual drinking session, sitting near the table, laughing and talking while sharing the bottle. I and my sister-in-law, his brother's wife, decided to join them again because there was really nothing else to do. We could not watch TV, we could not use our phones much because we were saving the battery, and the whole neighborhood was wrapped in darkness. We sat around the table, eating pulutan, listening to the brothers talk, sometimes adding our own stories, and just passing the time. After a while, when the drinks had warmed them up and the mood turned more relaxed, my husband's brother started to change the topic of the conversation. Instead of talking about the ship or their work, he started telling ghost stories. You know how it is in the Philippines, especially when there is a brownout, and everything is dark and quiet. People like to bring up spooky stories, maybe to entertain everyone or maybe to scare each other a little. He began with some stories he heard from other people, things that supposedly happened in nearby places, and then he moved on to the stories connected to their own house. That was the moment when I started to listen more carefully. He told us, in a serious tone but still with a small smile, that their house is not just an ordinary house, because according to them there are unseen residents living there too. He said it is not only one ghost but a whole family of ghosts that resides in their home. He described some of the strange experiences they had, like hearing footsteps when no one was there, seeing shadows in the hallway, or feeling someone sit on the bed when they were alone. Then he mentioned something that really got my attention. He said that the room where my husband and I were staying, our room during that visit, is the most haunted part of the house. He said it like a simple fact, not trying to joke, and he even added that most of the strange things seemed to happen near or inside that room. I remember that my sister-in-law gave a little nervous laugh and said that sometimes she also feels uncomfortable there, especially when she is alone. When I heard all of this, I did not scream or jump or show that I was very frightened, but inside I felt a cold feeling in my chest. The thing is, deep down, I could already sense something in that house before he even told me. From the first nights that we stayed there, I sometimes felt like the air in our room was heavier, or that I was not totally alone even when there was no one else in the room. I would sometimes hear soft sounds or feel like someone was watching me from the door or from one corner of the room, but I always tried to ignore it and tell myself that I was just imagining things because of the brownout and the quiet nights. I do not see ghosts clearly like some people claim, but I can sometimes feel or hear their presence. It is like a pressure or a small change in the atmosphere, the feeling that someone is nearby even if you cannot see them. So when my brother-in-law said that there were ghosts in the house and that our room was the most haunted place, it was like he was confirming something that my body already knew but my mind did not want to admit. Still, I tried to remain calm and not show that I was shaken, because I did not want to encourage more scary stories, and I did not want them to think that I was too weak or too easily frightened. My brother-in-law then said another thing that stayed with me. He said that he heard ghosts like to show themselves to people who do not believe in them. According to him, if you are very scared, sometimes they will not fully appear, but if you have doubts and do not really believe, they will try to prove themselves to you. At that time I half laughed and half shrugged when he said that. In my mind, I was in between, not fully believing and not fully disbelieving. I was not the type who liked ghost stories, but I also could not say that they were completely impossible. I thought maybe his stories were just exaggerated, or maybe spirits were real but they would not really bother me. I did not know then that I was about to have my own encounter that would change the way I looked at those things forever. One part of my daily habit, especially when I am at home or staying somewhere for more than a few days, is my afternoon nap, or what we call siesta time. I like to lie down for a few hours in the afternoon when the day feels slow and the heat makes you sleepy. It helps my body rest and gives me more energy for the evening. My husband already knows this about me. He knows that after lunch, if I say I am going to sleep for a while, I really mean it. He also knows another thing about me. I am very easily afraid when it is dark and I am alone. Even as an adult, I do not like being in a dark room by myself. In our own house I always tell him or someone else to wake me up before it gets too dark if I fall asleep in the afternoon. Otherwise I will wake up and the room will already be black and I will feel panicked and disoriented, and I hate that feeling very much. That is why I always remind him to wake me up before evening. On November 10th, the day after that ghost story drinking session, I decided again to take my siesta. It was still brownout, the electricity had not returned yet, and we were all tired from the past few days of stress because of the storm. I told my husband clearly, "I am going to sleep now for a while. Please make sure to wake me up before it gets dark, okay?" He knows I am afraid of being alone in a dark room, and he also knows I do not want to wake up in total darkness, so I felt relaxed after telling him that. I trusted that he would remember. The sky at that time was still a bit cloudy, but there was some sunlight. The room was dim but not really dark, and the air was slightly cooler because of the weather after the storm. I lay down on the bed in our room, pulled a pillow close to me, and closed my eyes. I could hear faint sounds from downstairs, the voices of my husband and his brother still talking, maybe laughing, and the soft clinking of bottles and plates. After a while those sounds started to blur in my ears as sleep pulled me down. Time passed, but I did not know how long. When I woke up, it was not the gentle waking that you have when you feel rested and comfortable. I woke up with that strange heavy feeling that tells you that something is wrong even before you fully open your eyes. I felt first that the air in the room was different. It was no longer soft and gray like in late afternoon. It was deep, almost like a solid darkness around me. When I opened my eyes, I realized right away that the room was already very dark. There was no light coming in from the window, no small glow from any bulb because there was no electricity, just the thick weight of the night inside the walls. I was still lying on the bed and I was alone. At first, I thought maybe my husband was just sitting somewhere in the room, but when my eyes adjusted a little, I saw that there was no one else on the bed or near me. The quiet of the room pressed on my ears. I felt a small wave of anger mixed with fear rise inside me. My first thought was, he forgot to wake me up. He knows I am afraid of the dark. He knows I always remind him. And still he had let me sleep until it was fully nighttime. That made me feel upset, but the stronger feeling was that I was not alone in the room even though I could not see anyone right away. You know that instinct you sometimes feel when somebody is standing behind you or watching you from a corner? That is what I felt. It was like an invisible pair of eyes was on me, and my skin started to shiver. My heart began to beat faster, not very loud at first, but enough for me to feel it in my chest. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself quietly, maybe it is just because it is too dark. Maybe I am still half asleep. I took a slow breath and tried to look around more carefully. That was when I saw it. Near the door of the room, not very far from the bed, there was a small figure standing. Because the room was dark, I could not see the details of the face, but the shape was clear enough. It looked like a child, a small boy, maybe about 5 or 6 years old, standing right where the door was. The boy was not just standing still. One of his hands was holding the doorknob and he was playing with it, moving it back and forth, up and down, in a slow but clear motion, as if he was turning it or pulling it again and again. The sound of the metal doorknob moving echoed in the quiet. The shape of the boy was darker than the darkness of the room, like a shadow that had become solid. I could see his outline against the door, his small shoulders, his head, his arm moving. I knew it was not just my imagination because the doorknob itself was moving. It did not look like a shadow cast by something outside, and it definitely was not my husband or any other adult because it was too small, and the way it moved was like that of a child. For a moment I froze, my mind trying to find a normal explanation. I thought, maybe it is just one of my nephews playing a trick on me. But then I remembered that there were no small children in the house at that time, and even if there were, no one would let them play in a pitch-dark room alone like that, especially during a brownout. Then I thought, maybe it is the wind moving the doorknob. But there was no wind. The window was closed, the air outside was still, and even if air could move a light curtain, it could not make the doorknob move in such a clear and controlled way, like someone's hand was gripping it. Each second that passed while I watched the small figure move seemed to stretch out. Fear spread through my whole body. My throat became dry, my hands started to shake, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. That was the moment when I truly knew that I was not alone in that room and that whatever was standing by the door was not a living person. Panic took over and I started to cry, my voice breaking as I called out for my husband. I shouted his name many times, louder and louder, hoping he would hear me from downstairs and come up to the room. "Please come here, come here!" I shouted, my voice shaking. But there was no answer. I could still faintly hear the sound of conversation and maybe laughter from below, like they were continuing their drinking session, unaware of what was happening to me. I felt like my voice was trapped in the walls of the room and could not reach them, like something was blocking my cries from going out the door where the boy stood. I knew I could not run to the door because the figure was standing exactly there, and something inside me refused to try to pass through him, or beside him. The more I looked, the more afraid I became. It felt like he was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I pressed my back against the headboard for a moment, then, shaking and sobbing, I moved to the corner of the bed that was farthest from the door. I curled myself there, pulling my knees close, hugging my pillow as tight as I could against my chest as if it could protect me. My whole body was trembling. I kept crying and shouting for my husband. "Please come here, please!" But still there was no response. Time slowed down. 5 minutes felt like 20, and 10 minutes felt like an hour. All the while, the dark figure of the boy remained by the door, still holding the doorknob and moving it gently back and forth. He did not come closer to the bed. And he did not go away. He was just there, blocking the one way out of the room. The fear was so strong that I could not think clearly. I covered my head with my pillow, wanting to hide from him, wanting not to see him anymore, but still knowing that he was there. Under the pillow, my breathing was fast and shallow. I felt trapped, like the darkness in the room had become thicker and was pressing on me along with my own panic. I am not sure how long I stayed like that, with my head under the pillow, crying and shaking and calling out. The last thing I clearly remember from inside that room is the sound of my own sobs and the feeling of that dark presence near the door. Then, suddenly, I felt someone beside me, and a hand was pulling the pillow away from my face. My first reaction was to resist, to hold the pillow tighter because I was still so afraid to see what was around me. I heard my husband's voice calling my name urgently. When I finally lowered the pillow and my eyes met his face, I felt a sudden rush of relief and fear at the same time. Relief because he was finally there, real and alive, and fear because I still believed that the boy was standing near the door. I grabbed my husband and hugged him as tightly as I could, clinging to him as if he was the only solid thing in the room. My whole body was still shaking. He spoke quickly, asking me what was wrong, why I was crying and shouting. I was not able to answer him clearly at first. I just kept repeating, "No, he is there, he is there," in a hysterical voice, trying to tell him that someone was at the door. In Tagalog I said, "Huwag and Ensia," meaning, "No, he is there." My husband tried to pull me up from the bed, but I did not want to move at first. I was afraid to go near the door because in my mind the figure was still there. My legs felt weak, like they could not support me, and I almost felt like a child again, afraid to step towards the dark. But my husband is much stronger than I am. He wrapped his arms around me and lifted me, almost carrying me as he forced us both out of the room. I kept holding onto him and repeating that someone was there at the door, but he did not stop. I could feel us moving across the floor, passing through the doorway, leaving that dark space. As soon as we were outside the room, near the top of the stairs or maybe already on the landing, I felt a different air on my skin. It was still dark in the house, but there were some candles lit downstairs, and the feeling of the space there was not as heavy as inside the room. My husband led me down slowly while I still clung to him, until we reached the lower floor near the door of the house. There, my legs finally felt more stable, and he made me sit at the doorstep so that I could breathe better. I was still crying, breathing hard, but slowly the panic began to loosen its grip on my chest. My husband gave me a glass of water and told me to drink. The coolness of the water helped calm me a little. When I stopped sobbing, everyone around me wanted to know what had happened. His brother, his brother's wife, maybe even some neighbors who were nearby, all looked at me with worried faces. They asked, "What happened? Why were you screaming? What did you see?" I was still shaking, but I tried to explain. The only thing I remember saying again and again was, "I could not get out of the room because there was someone at the door. There was someone at the door." In Tagalog I said, "Hindi kasi ako makalabas in cordo kasi may tao dun sa pinto." My voice still carried fear as I told them about the small figure of a boy holding the doorknob and playing with it while blocking my way out. As I talked, they exchanged looks with each other. Then some of them started to speak in their local language, which is Cebuano, and since I am not very fluent in it, I could not understand everything they were saying. I only picked up some words here and there, and I could sense from their tone that they were connecting what happened to the ghost stories my brother-in-law had told us the night before. It felt like for them, My experience was not that surprising, more like a confirmation of what they already believed about the house. For me, it was something deeper and more personal, because I had actually seen and felt the presence in a way that left me shaken to my core. My husband looked very worried. He knows how easily I get frightened, and he also saw how hysterical I was when he came into the room. He decided right then and there that we would not sleep in that house that night. He said there was no way he could just bring me back to that room and expect me to lie down there again as if nothing happened. So he told his family that we would spend the night in a nearby hotel instead. Even though it was more hassle and maybe a bit expensive, he chose that because he wanted me to feel safe and to be able to sleep without fear. I agreed immediately. There was no way I was going to lie down in that same bed, in that same room, with the memory of that dark little figure still fresh in my mind. That night, in the hotel, there was electricity, there were bright lights, and there were other people around, and even though I was still haunted by what I had seen, I felt calmer with my husband beside me in a place that did not feel heavy with unseen eyes. The next day, my husband's parents came to the house in Tbilisi. When they heard what had happened to me, they did not laugh or say that I was just imagining things. Instead, they brought things they called pangantra, which is what people use for protection against spirits or bad energies. These were simple objects, but full of meaning and belief. They had salt, which in many Filipino traditions is believed to ward off bad spirits when sprinkled around doors and windows. They had rosaries, which are religious items connected to prayer and faith. They might have had some holy water or blessed oil too, I am not sure, but I remember clearly the salt and the rosaries. My husband took the salt and went around the house, sprinkling it along the walls, near the windows, in the corners, and especially around our room. As he did this, he was chanting a prayer in their language, a mixture of Cebuano and the usual Catholic prayers they grew up with. Even if I did not understand every word, I knew the intention was to ask for protection and to tell any spirits that they should leave us in peace and not bother us anymore. His parents also hung rosaries on every door in the house, including the door of our room and the main door. Each rosary hanging there was like a small sign of faith and a reminder that there was a power greater than any spirit. Watching them do all this made me feel a bit more secure, as if the house was being wrapped in a spiritual shield. After that day, life in the house went back to something like normal on the surface. My afternoon siesta habit did not disappear completely, because my body still needed rest and we were tired from everything that had happened. But there was now a big difference. I never again allowed myself to sleep alone in that room when it was close to sunset. If I wanted to sleep in the afternoon, I made sure to lie down somewhere where other people were nearby, or I would leave the door wide open with someone else moving around just outside. If I had to use that room, I would insist that my husband be there with me. I still felt the presence in the house sometimes. That sense that we were not the only ones living there did not disappear just because of the salt and the prayers. But after that one clear encounter with the boy at the door, I did everything I could to avoid seeing him again. The memory of that small dark figure, a child who did not speak or move closer but just stood there holding the doorknob, is something that stays with me even now. Before all this happened, I was in the middle, half believing, half doubting the stories about ghosts, even when my brother-in-law talked about a family of spirits living in their house. I thought maybe they were exaggerating or just telling stories to entertain us. After that afternoon nap turned into a nightmare while I was awake, my belief changed. I can no longer say with confidence that ghosts are not real. I have seen something that I cannot explain in any normal way, and I have felt a fear that did not come from my imagination alone. I still try to live normally and I do not want to focus on these things all the time, but I now understand that sometimes, in some houses, we are not as alone as we think, and that respect, prayer, and caution are important when you share a space with things you may not see but can definitely feel. The house itself was not really very old. If you looked at it from the outside, it just seemed like any other two-story house in the subdivision, maybe around 20 to 25 years old, painted in a plain color, nothing grand, nothing broken down. It was a house for rent, and my family had been looking for a place we could afford, so when the agent told us about it, we all went together to check it out. It was daytime when we first stepped through the gate, and the sun outside was bright and hot, but the moment we walked inside the house, something strange hit me. It was like an invisible wave of sadness suddenly slammed into my chest. I had no reason at all to feel that way. I was not heartbroken, I was not sick, nothing bad had happened that morning, but as soon as my foot crossed the threshold, a heavy, sad feeling wrapped around me. It was so strong that I almost wanted to turn around and go back out. I looked at my dad and I could already see from his expression that he felt something too. He later told me that the first thing he noticed was that the house looked darker than it should have been. All the windows were open, and if you looked around, you would say that there was enough light, but still, the rooms just seemed dimmer, like a gray filter was placed over the air. It was not like a simple shadow. It was more like the house itself was absorbing some of the light. While my parents spoke with the agent downstairs, I went up to see the room that might become my bedroom, trying to shake off the strange weight on my chest. On the second floor, everything looked normal at first glance. There was a small hallway, a couple of doors, and the usual layout you would expect. But the closer I came to the room that would be mine, the stronger the feeling of heaviness became. It was like sadness upon sadness, layered on top of each other. When I entered the room, my eyes were immediately drawn to the built-in closet. It was just an ordinary wooden closet, a bit old but still solid, with double doors that opened outward. For some reason I felt like I had to look inside, so I walked over and pulled the doors open. What I saw made my skin crawl. The walls inside the closet were full of writings. They were written in different sizes and strokes, some big, some small, some light, some dark, all done with markers or pens. From the handwriting I could tell that most of them were done by children or at least someone very young. There were random names, short phrases, ugly little drawings, and then, in the middle, written large so I could not ignore it, was one sentence that stood out. Mamadi na keo. In English, that means, all of you die. Seeing those words suddenly there in front of my face made my heart beat faster. I had this feeling that whoever wrote it was angry, full of hate, or full of pain. I stood there staring for a few seconds, feeling a cold line travel slowly down my back. My mind tried to comfort me by saying it was probably just a bored child, some previous tenant's kid who wrote nonsense on the walls, maybe trying to be edgy, or just playing. Still, the combination of the heavy atmosphere, the sadness I felt, and those words in a hidden space made me uneasy. I closed the closet slowly and stepped back, suddenly aware that the room felt like it was filled with invisible eyes, watching quietly from the corners. I tried to brush it off, telling myself not to be silly. I went back downstairs and we left the house, but the memory of that closet stayed in my mind. It did not take long before we decided to move in anyway. Rent was reasonable and the location was convenient, so even with the strange feeling, my parents thought it was a good practical choice. On the first day of moving, everything seemed fine on the surface. We were busy carrying boxes, arranging basic furniture, and making trips back and forth. The sadness in the air was still there, but during the day, when you are tired and focused on lifting things and fixing things, it is easier to ignore what you feel inside. The house still seemed darker than other houses even in daylight, but we just opened all the curtains and told ourselves that when the lights were installed properly it would be fine. That first night, nothing major happened. We were just tired and fell asleep quickly. It was on the second day that the house began to show a different side. We were still in the middle of setting everything up. My mom and my sister went to the market to buy groceries, leaving me and my dad alone in the house. My dad and I were rearranging cabinets, fixing the positions of chairs, and trying to make sense of where to put everything. While we were working, we suddenly heard loud footsteps upstairs, like someone was stomping around heavily. It was so clear and so strong that both of us stopped and looked up at the ceiling at the same time. There was no one else in the house. My mom and sister were out, and we were both downstairs. We exchanged a look, and before we could say anything, there were banging sounds on the walls, like fists or something hard hitting wood, followed by the sudden slamming of a door upstairs. It sounded like somebody was moving around in anger. In the quiet of the afternoon, the noise seemed to echo. At first, we tried to explain it away. Maybe it was the wind, maybe the house was still adjusting, maybe some neighbor's noise was coming through. But the sounds were so clear and so close that it was hard to believe they were coming from outside. I watched my dad's face change from confusion to annoyance. He was never easily scared. He got irritated faster than he got frightened. Finally, he looked up toward the second floor and shouted in a firm, loud voice, "Tama na!" which means, "Stop!" in English. His voice filled the house and echoed up the stairs. After he yelled, the footsteps stopped, the banging stopped, the doors slamming stopped. The house became quiet again so suddenly that it was almost more unsettling than the noise itself. For the rest of that day we did not hear those sounds again. We continued working, but every now and then I caught my dad glancing at the stairs, as if expecting something to start up again. When night came, my room was still not finished arranged, so I slept in my parents' room together with my sister. We moved our mattresses close to each other, and tried to make it feel cozy despite the unfamiliar surroundings. Sometime in the middle of the night, my mom woke my dad up. Her voice was not very loud, but there was fear in it. Because I am a light sleeper, I also woke up when she sat up and shook his shoulder. The first thing I did was reach for my phone to check the time. The digital numbers glowed in the dark, around 3:30 in the morning, maybe 3:35. It was in that cursed hour when everything is quiet and shadows feel heavier. We asked my mom what was wrong. She said she was hearing voices, like several people talking at the same time, somewhere inside or near the room. We listened carefully, but all I could hear was the faint hum of the electric fan and the distant sounds from outside the house. My mom insisted. She said the voices had been going on for a while, whispering or talking in a tone she could not ignore. We asked her what they were saying, and her answer made me more uneasy. She said, "I bang salida young gamet nila dko maintindian." That means, "They are using another language, I can't understand them." It was not English, not Tagalog, not any dialect she knew. It was as if strangers were having a conversation just out of sight in a tongue she had never heard. That was only the first time it happened. After that, she started hearing the voices almost every night, always around the same ghostly hour. At first it scared her so much that she would have trouble going back to sleep, but after some time she became so used to it that she learned to simply ignore them, like background noise. She would wake up, notice that the voices were there again, and then say a silent prayer and force herself to sleep. It was as if the house was full of invisible people who held their own conversations in a different dimension, overlapping our world but not quite touching it. A week after we moved in, my own room was finally ready for me to use. We had placed the bed where we wanted it, arranged my things, and fixed the curtains. I told myself that everything would be fine. I was tired of sleeping in my parents' room and wanted my own space. However, from the very first night I spent there, things were not peaceful. That first night, I had a nightmare that felt more real than many waking moments. In the dream, I was lying on my bed just like in real life, and there was a little girl standing near me. At first she looked harmless, just a small figure with the shape of a child, but then she climbed onto the bed and suddenly started choking me. Her hands wrapped around my neck with unnatural strength, squeezing so hard that I could not breathe. I tried to fight back, to grab her wrists, to kick her away, but my arms and legs felt heavy and weak, as if something was pinning me down. I could feel my lungs burning and my vision closing in. The more I struggled, the more pressure I felt on my throat. In the dream, I eventually felt myself losing consciousness. Everything went dark, and at that exact moment I woke up with a gasp in the real world. My heart was pounding as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. My throat hurt, not like from real bruises, but tight and sore as if I had been holding my breath too long. The room was dark and quiet. I reached for my phone quickly, the light almost hurting my eyes, and checked the time. Once again, it was around 3:30 in the morning. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The closet door. which I was sure I had closed before going to sleep, was now open. Not just a little open, but open wide, as if someone had pulled both doors outward and left them like that. The closet was a dark rectangle of deeper shadow against the already dim room. Every instinct in me screamed that I was being watched from that darkness. Trying to be brave, I got up slowly, walked to the closet, and pushed the doors closed. As soon as they clicked shut, I hurried downstairs to get a drink of water and calm myself. Being in the kitchen with the lights on made me feel a little better. I stayed there for a while, breathing, telling myself it was only a dream. When I finally gathered enough courage to go back up to my room, I almost dropped my glass. The closet door, which I had closed myself just a few minutes earlier, was now wide open again. The doors were swung open like welcoming arms of something unseen. As I stood there frozen, staring, the doors suddenly slammed shut on their own, loud and sharp. The sound exploded in the silence. I did not wait to see anything else. I ran to my bed, jumped under my blanket like a frightened child, and stayed there shaking until the first light of dawn started to slip through the curtains around 5:30. Only when I saw the sky turning faintly gray did I finally relax my grip on the blanket. After a few more nights in that room, I noticed a pattern. If I made sure to close the closet doors firmly before I went to sleep and did not forget to check them, nothing strange would happen. I would still feel the heaviness in the room, but the doors would stay shut, and I would sleep without nightmares or at least without waking up at 3:30. So I made that a habit. Every night, I would double-check the closet, maybe even push a chair nearby, and then go to bed with a little more peace of mind. That worked for some time, and you could say I made some kind of silent agreement with whatever was in that room. I would close the closet, and it would leave me alone. But one night, after I came home a bit drunk from a gathering with friends, I broke my own rule without meaning to. I was tired, my head was heavy, and all I wanted to do was lie down and sleep. I dropped onto my bed without even looking around or checking the closet doors. I did not even bother to turn off the light properly. I just let myself fall. In the middle of the night, I woke up again from the same kind of nightmare. In the dream, the little girl was there once more, choking me, pressing down with those thin but powerful hands, and once again I could not fight her off. When I woke up, breathing hard, my throat hurting and my body covered in cold sweat, I grabbed my phone like before. It was again around 3:30 in the morning. This time, though, the feeling was different. I was not only afraid, I also felt a deep, heavy sadness, like a weight on my chest, and an icy fear that seemed to reach all the way into my bones. While I was still lying there trying to understand what was happening, I felt a cold breeze run gently but clearly along my back, even though the room was closed and no window was open. The feeling of that cold air sliding over my skin scared me so much that I jumped up from the bed like I had been shocked. When I turned toward the closet, of course, the doors were open again, wide and dark, like a mouth waiting for something. I did not even have the courage to step closer this time. It was enough for me to know that whatever was attached to that closet did not like it when I became careless. One of the most memorable and frightening incidents in that house did not happen to me directly but to my father. It was late at night. He had been out and came home after we had all gone to bed. His cell phone was dead because the battery had run out, so he could not call any of us to ask us to open the door. He knocked several times on the main door, but for some strange reason none of us heard it. It was not like him to make only a soft knock. My dad's knock was usually strong and clear, enough to wake most people. What was even stranger is that I was sleeping in the bedroom directly above the main door, and as I said, I am a light sleeper. Normally I would wake up at even a small noise, but that night it was like a heavy blanket of silence was placed between us. When no one answered the door, my dad stepped back outside and looked up to my window. He started shouting my name and my sister's name, calling out loudly in the street, trying to wake us. He shouted for a long time, his voice echoing against the nearby walls, but my sister and I remained asleep. Then, during one of the times when he looked up, he suddenly saw a figure in my window. There was a female silhouette standing there, facing out. The shape was clear enough that he thought it was my sister. Relieved, he waved at the figure, calling out again, telling her to open the door. The figure did not move. It did not wave back, did not nod, did not leave the window to go downstairs. It just stood there, very still, like a shadow cut out from darkness. My dad kept shouting, but that person by the window remained frozen. After a while, frustrated and tired, he gave up. It had already been at least an hour of knocking and shouting, and nobody was opening the door. He decided to sleep in the car and just talk to us in the morning. As he was about to open the car door to climb in, my mom suddenly opened the front door of the house. She called out to him and said, "Nathan Gap Ko Young Text Mo," which means, "I received your text." My dad looked at her, confused and a little angry, and said, "Anom text? Apada cell phone ko low bat." In English, that is, "What text? My phone is dead, the battery is empty." My mom then checked her own cell phone to show him the message, but the strange thing was that the message was no longer there. A few minutes earlier she had seen something that made her get up and open the door, but now there was no record of it at all. My dad then told her about the girl he saw standing in my window, how he thought it was our sister, and how she just watched him without moving nor helping. When we all talked about it the next day, my sister of course said that she had been sleeping the whole time, and had never gone to the window that night. Another experience came from my uncle, who stayed with us for a while. He was very into sabong, cockfighting, and he kept several roosters and chickens in the small backyard behind the house. Every day he would wake up very early, around 4:30 in the morning, to feed them and take care of them. It became his ritual. After feeding the chickens, he would go back inside, sit down at the table near the bottom of the stairs, and drink his morning coffee. One day, I woke up around the same time he did, maybe by accident, or maybe because my body had adjusted to the house's strange schedule. I went outside and helped him give feed and water to the chickens and roosters, enjoying the cool air before the sun rose. Around 5 in the morning, we both sat down to have coffee together at the table. While we sat there, talking quietly, we suddenly heard loud footsteps coming down the stairs behind me. They were heavy, like someone was walking with firm steps, and the sound was so clear that if you had been there, you would expect to see a person any second. I turned around slightly, feeling my heart speed up, but my uncle did not even stand up. He just sighed heavily and said, almost in an annoyed tone, "Ian kanana man nagakate pa akeo." In English, that is, "There you go again, I'm still drinking my coffee." As soon as he said that, the footsteps stopped. He then turned to me and said very casually, "Si Michael yen, lagi yen bamababa pag ganatong oras." That means, "That's Michael, he always goes down around this time." He said it like he was talking about a real person, maybe a family member who had the habit of walking around in the early morning, but there was no Michael living with us. He was referring to one of the unseen residents of the house, a spirit he had apparently gotten used to. The way he talked about it made me feel both scared and strangely calm at the same time. It was like the house had its own schedule, its own early riser ghost who liked to walk down the stairs at 5 in the morning while people had coffee. These were only some of the stronger and more unforgettable experiences we had in that house. Many other small things happened, too many to count. Sometimes we would hear doors creak open by themselves and then close again, even when there was no breeze. Sometimes we would feel someone passing by us, like a soft pressure in the air, or we would see shadows move at the edge of our vision. Sometimes the atmosphere would suddenly grow colder in one corner of the room. Sometimes, when you were alone, you would feel like someone was standing just behind you, watching, but when you turned around, nobody was there. After a while, strangely, you almost get used to it, and start treating the unseen like unwanted but tolerated housemates. We learn how to talk to them sometimes, like my dad shouting, "Tama na," or my uncle joking with "Michael" in the early mornings. Even my mom accepted the nightly voices as something she could not control, so she chose to ignore them and live with them. We became the longest staying tenants in that house. People in the neighborhood told us that before we came, around 10 different families had lived there, but most of them left after only 2 or 3 months. Many could not stand the strange events. Some simply gave no clear reason but moved out quickly. It was only later, when we became more friendly with the neighbors and some of the older people on the street began sharing stories, that we learned a bit about the history of the place. Long before the house was built, the whole area was much more rural. There were a lot of trees, tall grasses, and empty lots, and the streets were not as crowded as they are now. Some parts nearby are still quiet and a bit wild, but back then it was much more open and isolated. According to the elders and even confirmed by old stories connected to the local police reports, the exact spot where our house stood used to be a dumping ground for dead bodies. People who were killed by gangs or syndicates, people who were part of what we call salvage, in our language, were often taken there at night and left under the cover of darkness. There had been many cases like that, they said, before the subdivision was developed and houses started to rise. Knowing this, a lot of things suddenly made sense and at the same time made the whole experience more disturbing. The sadness we felt when we first entered, the darkness inside even on bright days, the angry writing in the closet that said, "Mamadi na kale," the voices in an unknown language, the little girl in my nightmares, the footsteps on the stairs, the female figure in the window, the invisible texter who woke my mom, the early morning walker my uncle called Michael, all of them could be the restless echoes of the people whose lives ended violently in that spot. Maybe some of them did not even know they were dead. Maybe some were still angry, still full of pain, still watching the living who now walked on top of the land where their bodies were once thrown away. We stayed in that house for 7 years. We learned to live with the invisible, to share our space with what we could not fully see. But no matter how used to it we became, there was always that feeling, deep down, that the house and the ground it stood on remembered things that it could not forget, and sometimes, in the middle of the night, it whispered or moved to remind us. When I think back to my childhood, I always see that house in Alabang first, like a picture that never really fades. I was around 7 years old when we were still living there, and to me it felt like a big, important place, not just because it was our family home, but because so many strange things happened inside it. The house was inside a subdivision, with a proper gate and guards, lined with trees and similar-looking houses on both sides of the road, but ours always felt different. From outside it looked normal enough, with a small garden in front, some plants my mom loved, and a path leading to the front door. But if you stayed there long enough, especially at night, it was like the air changed and you could feel something else moving quietly around you. When I was very young I did not really understand the stories the adults kept telling each other in low voices. I only knew that the housemaids often wanted to resign, and every time they explained why, I would get goosebumps even if my mother kept saying it was only their imagination. The maids came in and out of our lives like passing shadows. One would work for us a few months, sometimes even shorter, then suddenly asked to leave, looking pale and nervous. They always had different reasons at first, like needing to go home to the province, or having a sick relative. But when they spoke to my mom more privately, they would say things that stuck in my mind. One maid mentioned a white lady in the garden, standing under the trees late at night, her long hair and white dress moving in the wind even when the air was still. Another said she saw an old man sitting inside the computer room, his back facing the door, always looking out the window as if waiting for someone who never came. There was also a story about the grandfather clock, that no matter how you set it, it would always find a way to point to 12 midnight, or that it would suddenly chime as if it was exactly 12 even when the time was different. Some of them swore that shadows wandered inside the house, especially in the hallway and near the stairs, moving slowly from one wall to another, like dark figures passing by. I was just a little girl listening from the side, but even then my skin would prickle and I would hold on to my mother's arm. She would pat my head and tell me not to listen, tell me that the helpers were just tired or superstitious, that the house was fine, that there was nothing there. She always said those things with a calm voice, but sometimes I caught a quick look in her eyes, like she was trying to convince herself too. One moment that stays very clear in my memory happened when I turned 8 years old. We had a house party for my birthday, and the house that usually felt a bit heavy suddenly became bright and noisy. We invited other family members from out of town, and the place was full of voices, laughter, and the smell of food. The adults stayed mostly in the dining room and kitchen, talking over plates of pancit, barbecue, and cake, while we children did what children do during parties. We ran around, shouted, and turned every corner into a playground. When it was already dark outside and the party was in full swing, someone suggested we play hide and seek inside the house. There were a lot of us cousins, and the house had plenty of places to hide, so everyone agreed at once. We chose one cousin to be it, and the rest of us scattered in all directions, giggling and bumping into each other on the stairs and in the hallways. I decided to hide inside my parents' room, the master bedroom, because it was big and had many hiding spots, and I felt kind of safe in there. I went straight to the closet, the big one with the sliding doors, and slipped inside. The closet smelled of clothes, perfume, and something faintly old, like wood that had been there for years. I slid the door almost all the way shut, but I left it a little bit open so I could breathe more easily and also peek out into the room to see if someone was coming. At first, everything was normal. I could hear my cousins running around in the other rooms, their footsteps and laughter echoing down the hallway. I could hear the cousin counting loudly from somewhere downstairs and threatening to start searching. The sound of people talking and music from the dining area drifted up gently, mixing with our own noise. I remember feeling excited, trying not to laugh, pressing my back against the closet wall, thinking how clever my hiding place was. Then something changed. The air inside the closet suddenly felt colder, the kind of cold that does not come from air conditioning or a fan, but from something else. It slid over my skin and made the tiny hairs on my arms stand up. At first I thought maybe I was just nervous, but then I noticed that the usual sounds from outside seemed to fade a little, like someone was slowly lowering the volume around me. Through the small opening of the sliding door, I could see a part of my parents' room and the doorway that led to their bathroom, which was near the closet. As I watched that area without really thinking, I saw a shadow move. It was the shape of an old man, not very clear, but more than just a trick of the light. He walked, or at least seemed to walk, across my field of view, moving toward the bathroom. I could see his outline, his bent posture, and the way he passed close to the closet, enough for me to feel like if I reached out, I could touch him. There was no sound of footsteps, no rustling of clothes, only that shape moving in front of me. In my young mind, I tried to find a simple explanation. I told myself it was probably just one of my uncles or some older male relative that my mom had allowed to use her bathroom, like she sometimes did when the other one was occupied. I held my breath and stayed as still as possible, choosing not to move in case they opened the closet and discovered me. I waited a few seconds, listening for the sound of the bathroom door closing or the soft noise of running water, anything that would prove it was just a real person. But nothing came. The silence in the room became louder somehow. My heart started beating faster, and I felt a pressure in my chest like the air was getting thinner. Finally, I could not stand it anymore. I slowly pushed the sliding door open a little more and peered out carefully, expecting to see someone in the bathroom or at least the bathroom door closed. The bathroom door was open. No one was inside. The lights in the bedroom were the same as before, nothing changed, yet the shadow I saw was gone. I looked around the room, then toward the hallway outside. From that angle, I could see that all our visitors and family members were in the dining room or in the areas leading to it, and I could still hear the voices and laughter coming from there. There was no one near my parents' room at all. The only footsteps I could now hear were those of my cousins still playing. Right at that moment, the cousin who was it finally found me. She opened the door wider and shouted that I was out, but when she saw my face, her smile faded. I told her in a shaking voice what I had just seen, how the old man's shadow passed by the closet and walked toward the bathroom, and how when I checked, there was no one there. Her own face turned pale, and the hairs on her arms stood up like mine. She looked at the empty bathroom and then back at me, and we both felt the same thing, fear. After that, we lost that playful mood we had a few minutes before. We went back to the others and told the rest of our cousins what I saw. All of us got scared. The hide-and-seek game ended right there. No one wanted to run around the house alone anymore or hide in dark corners or inside closets. We stuck together in a group like chicks to a hen, following each other nervously and glancing back at the hallway whenever the house creaked. We told our parents, of course, the way children always do when something frightens them. But none of them believed us. Some laughed it off, saying we should stop watching horror movies or listening to ghost stories. Others told us we just imagined it, that shadows and lights can fool our eyes, especially when we are tired or overly excited from playing. Even my mom told me to stop scaring myself and enjoy my birthday. So we ended up going outside in front of the house, staying where the air was fresh and where the darkness did not feel too close. We had been outside for a while, still a bit rattled but trying to distract ourselves, when something happened that made everyone stop and stare. My uncle, one of the bravest and most cheerful in the family, suddenly screamed from the direction of the public toilet. Then we saw him running out, his face pale, almost gray, and sweat shining on his forehead. He looked like he wanted to cry and shout at the same time. It was such a strange sight because we were used to seeing him joking and laughing, not shaking like that. The adults rushed toward him, and the children crowded behind them, trying to see what was going on. When he could finally speak, he told everyone that while he was inside the toilet, he saw a ghost girl in the mirror. He said she was not there when he entered, but when he looked up after washing his hands, her face was suddenly behind his, staring at him. That image frightened him so much that he ran out without even looking back. Hearing him talk about it made the hair on my neck stand up again. If even he, an adult, a strong man, could be that scared, then maybe what we had seen and felt earlier was not just our imagination after all. The year after that, things in our lives started to change. Because of my schooling, my parents decided that it would be better for us to move to Manila. Alabang was too far from the school they wanted me to attend, and the daily travel was tiring and expensive. So we left that house, the one full of shadows and whispers, and started a new life in the city. Some of our other family members also moved away around that time. A few went abroad for work, others got jobs in Quezon City or other parts of Metro Manila. Slowly, the old family home in Alabang was left empty, with nobody living there full-time. It stood there in the subdivision like a quiet witness to everything that had happened inside its walls, windows closed, rooms dark except when someone visited to check on it. Years passed. I grew up. The memories of that house did not disappear completely, but they became like old photos in a box, which you only look at sometimes. When I reached 20 years old, my family decided to go back to the Alabang house for a while. They had it repainted and repaired since no one had lived there properly for years. Broken tiles were fixed, walls were made fresh and bright again, and leaks in the roof were patched. They wanted to see if it could be used again, maybe rented out, or used as a family house during weekends. I decided to go with them, partly out of curiosity and partly because I thought that maybe, after all the changes, the house would feel different. I told myself that I was older now, and that all those strange things from my childhood were probably exaggerated in my memory. On the day we went back, we arrived in the subdivision together. The house looked cleaner and newer from the outside, with fresh paint and a more lively color. Some plants had been trimmed, and the garden, at least at first glance, looked less wild. But even before we reached the front door, something happened that reminded us of the past. One of my mother's friends, who also lived in the subdivision, happened to see us entering the gate. She came over to greet my mom and us. They had a short chat, sharing updates about family and life. In the middle of their conversation, my mom's friend suddenly turned toward the house, looked up at one of the windows, and then, as if she had just remembered something, she told my mother to send her regards to my mom's father. She said something like, "Oi, regards Pala K Papa Mo, Nikita Ko Sia Kanina, Nakayupo Sa rocking chair." In English, that is, "Oh, send my regards to your father, I saw him earlier, sitting on the rocking chair." She said she saw an old man from the window, sitting on a rocking chair, facing backward, gently rocking. From the angle of the road, she could see inside through the window and thought that my grandfather was there, spending time in the room by himself. My blood ran cold, because my mother's father, my grandfather, had already died a long time ago. I never even got to meet him in person. When my mom told her friend that he had passed away many years before, the friend's face changed. You could see the realization and the fear slowly appear in her eyes as the words sank in. She looked back at the window she had pointed to just a moment earlier, perhaps half expecting to see the figure still there. There was nothing now but a curtain and the reflection of the sky. The friend felt quiet for a few seconds, then made a quick excuse to leave. She walked away faster than before, glancing back at the house more than once. That short exchange outside, right before we even set foot inside, reminded me of all the stories the maids used to tell and made my chest feel heavy again. As we began to use the house again, even for short visits, other strange experiences followed. We had a house boy during that time, someone who helped with cleaning and other chores while we were there. He slept in the driver's room located inside the garage, a small space with just enough room for a bed, some hangers on the wall, and a few personal things. One day he reported something to us that made all of us fall silent. He told us about a night when he was sleeping in that room. He said he was already deep in sleep when he suddenly woke up because he could not breathe. At first he thought he was just having a bad dream, but then he became fully aware and realized that something was pressing down on his face. His pillow was over his face, pushing hard, like someone was holding it there to suffocate him. He tried to push it away, but the pressure did not lessen. He said that as he reached up with his hands to pull the pillow off, he felt something that made his blood run cold, a cold hand holding his wrists. It was not a warm, living hand, but something icy that gripped his fingers and pushed back, like a person defending themselves or trying to keep him from removing the pillow. He struggled, moving his arms, trying to pull away, but the grip was strong. He said he could not see anything because the pillow was still over his eyes and nose, but he could feel that cold, firm hold on his hands. Finally, with all his strength, he twisted his body sideways, rolling away from the pillow and off to the side of the bed. The pillow fell away from his face, and he gasped for air, his lungs burning. He stood up quickly, heart racing, and turned on the light at once. When the light flooded the small room, everything was exactly as it had been before he fell asleep. There was no one else there. The only things inside were the bed he had just rolled off, the hangers on the wall, and his few belongings. The door was locked from the inside. He had checked it before sleeping. There was no other way for someone to enter or leave without him noticing. He looked under the bed, behind the door, in every corner, but there was nothing, no sign of an intruder. He said that even after the light was on, he could still feel the echo of that cold hand on his skin. He told us this story with a serious face, no trace of joking or exaggerating. When he finished, he looked at the garage as if expecting something to move there. We listened quietly, each of us thinking of the other strange things that had already happened in this house. Hearing his experience made me think again about all the years we had spent in that Alabang house, the maids who saw the white lady in the garden, the shadow of the old man in the computer room facing the window, the grandfather clock that always seemed to return to 12, the shadows sliding around the corners, the old man's outline near my parents' bathroom when I was hiding in the closet on my 8th birthday, the ghost girl in the mirror that frightened my uncle so much, my mom's friend. Greeting a dead grandfather she thought she had just seen in a rocking chair, and now the houseboy almost being suffocated by an invisible presence in the garage. All these moments together made the house feel like more than just concrete and wood. It felt like a place where the past clung tightly to the present, where people who were no longer alive still walked, sat, watched, and sometimes tried to touch. Even though my mother always tried to explain things in a logical way or brush them off as imagination, deep inside I knew there was something different about that house in Alabang, something that fresh paint and new repairs could not change. Looking back now, I understand why the maids kept leaving, why visitors sometimes felt uneasy without knowing exactly why, and why some family members avoided sleeping there alone. For me, that house will always be the place where my childhood fear and curiosity mixed together, where I learned that sometimes shadows are not just shadows, and where, even as an adult, I still feel that if I look too long at the windows or listen too carefully at night, I might see or hear someone who is no longer supposed to be there. I was in 4th grade when it happened, just an ordinary kid then, and now that I am already 23 and living in a city in Metro Manila, I still remember that day like it was yesterday, as if I am still that little student walking alone in the school hallway with my teacher's bag in my hand and my heart suddenly beating too fast. Our school was not that big, but to a child it felt like a whole world of its own, with its old buildings, loud classrooms, and a gymnasium that always seemed too hot during the day and too dark at night. The event took place during our foundation day, which was always a big thing for us. The whole campus was decorated with colorful streamers and balloons, booths were set up along the corridors, and students came to school extra early, wearing their best uniforms or costumes if they were performing. That day the gymnasium was packed. All the students from different grade levels, the teachers, some staff, even a few parents and visitors were there. The air was thick with noise and excitement. The sound of cheering and clapping bounced off the walls and the metal beams of the roof. The stage lights were on, making everything look bright and almost unreal, and the music from the speakers was so loud that you could feel the vibration in your chest. My classmates and I were seated together on the bleachers, shouting and laughing, trying to see who was performing next. I remember the smell of sweat, powder, and food from the canteen mixing together, and the teachers constantly shushing the younger students while secretly smiling because everyone was having fun. In the middle of all this, my teacher suddenly leaned toward me and called my name. I looked at her and saw that she seemed a little worried, or maybe just distracted, and she asked me if I could go up to our classroom and get her bag. I did not know why she left her bag there when everybody was supposed to be at the gym, and at that time I was too shy to ask questions, so I just nodded and said yes. For me, when a teacher asked you to do something, you did it. I got up from my seat, squeezed past my classmates who teased me a little and told me to hurry back, and then walked down the bleachers toward the exit. As soon as I stepped outside the gymnasium, the loud sound from the performers and the crowd became a bit muffled, like someone suddenly put hands over my ears. I could still hear the cheering and the music, but it grew faint as I moved farther away, replaced little by the usual quiet of the corridors at the back of the gym. Our classroom was in a building behind the gymnasium, on the 2nd floor. That building had a different feeling from the newer ones nearer the main gate. The walls were a bit old, the paint not so fresh, and the windows were the type you had to push outwards with a metal handle. I had already heard stories about that place, especially about the upper floors and the long hallways, because older students liked to talk about ghosts and strange things that happened there. They would whisper that some corridors were malamig, even on hot days, or that the janitors refused to stay alone in certain rooms at night. There were stories about a headless priest, a crying child, a woman in white, and other things that, as a 4th grader, I tried not to think about too much. But that day, maybe because it was bright and I knew everyone was in the gym, I did not feel afraid at first. I walked with my mind on my teacher's bag and the idea that I would miss part of the next performance if I did not move quickly. It took me around 10 minutes to reach the room, not because it was very far, but because the path included a small open area, a set of stairs, and then the long hallway leading to our classroom. When I got to our room, the door was unlocked and slightly open, maybe left that way in the rush of everyone going to the gym. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. The classroom looked strange when it was empty and quiet. The chairs were all lined up neatly, the blackboard still had chalk marks on it from our last lesson, and the sunlight coming through the windows made square patches of light on the floor. It was so different from the noisy scene I had just left in the gym that for a moment I just stood there, listening to my own breathing. I noticed that the air in the room felt a bit cooler than outside, and the silence made even the small sounds, like a distant dog barking or a car passing by the street outside the school, seem louder. I looked around and saw my teacher's bag on top of her desk, where she always left it. It was a familiar bag, and lifting it, I could feel its usual weight, like there were papers and maybe a pencil case and some personal things inside. I grabbed the bag quickly and headed out the door, thinking only of getting back to the gym and catching up with my friends. As soon as I stepped outside the room, I found myself facing the long hallway. The corridor stretched straight in front of me, with classrooms on one side and windows on the other. At the far end of that hallway, if you turned left, you would reach a closed staircase that nobody used anymore. I heard that it was blocked off a long time ago, maybe because it was unsafe, or because they wanted to prevent students from going up to some old part of the building. If you turned right at the end of the hallway, that would take you to another long corridor that connected to the stairway leading down to the area near the gymnasium. I had walked that path many times before, usually with my classmates, sometimes alone, and I had never seen anything really strange, only felt a bit uneasy when it was already late and there were not many people around. On that day, however, something unusual happened as soon as I started walking. I closed our classroom door behind me and took a few steps forward, holding the bag with one hand. Then I noticed two people in the hallway ahead of me. They were not very far, but not very close either, maybe halfway to the end of the corridor. One looked like a woman, the other like a child. They were walking side by side, slowly moving toward the left turn at the far end, in the direction of the closed stairs. Their backs were facing me, so I only saw the back of their heads, their shoulders, and the way their legs moved as they walked. The woman seemed to be wearing a dress or skirt, and the child, who was shorter, looked like he or she was wearing a simple outfit, maybe shorts and a shirt, or something similar. At first I thought they were just visitors, maybe a mother and her kid who got lost looking for the gym. We had visitors sometimes during big school events like Foundation Day, so it would not be strange for someone to wander into the wrong building. Because of that, my first reaction was not fear. I felt a sort of responsibility instead, like I should tell them that there was no way through that side, since the stairs were closed. So I decided to run a little so I could catch up to them. I called out softly at first, unsure if they could hear me over the faint noise from the gym, but they did not turn around. I started to jog, my footsteps sounding loud on the floor in the quiet corridor. As I ran and came nearer, something about them began to look different. At first I thought maybe the light in the hallway was changing because some clouds passed in front of the sun, but then I noticed it was not the hallway that changed. It was them. Their colors began to fade in a strange way. When I first saw them, they looked normal, like regular people, though I could already see they did not belong to our usual group of students and teachers. But as I moved closer, it was as if someone was slowly turning down the color on a television. Their skin, clothes, and hair turned into the shade of old photographs, first a dull brown, then something like a yellowish sepia tone. It was not like seeing them through tinted glass or a filter over my eyes, because when I glanced quickly at the walls and floor around them, everything else still looked normal, with the usual colors. Only the woman and the child were changing, becoming like figures from a very old picture, walking quietly down a hallway that was still in the present. I tried to think that maybe my eyes were just playing tricks because of the light. Maybe I was too tired, or maybe I had been staring at the bright stage lights in the gym for too long, and now the darker corridor was confusing my vision. But then I realized that even if that was the case, it did not explain why they did not react to my presence at all. I started to shout a little louder, telling them that there was no way where they were going. I said that the stairs at the end were already closed. Normally, if you shout at people in a quiet corridor, they would at least pause, look back, or show some sign that they heard you. These two did nothing. They did not even change the way they walked. They just kept moving calmly, step by step, toward the left turn and the dead end. By this time I was maybe 10 steps away from them, close enough that I should have been able to see more details, but instead, their features seemed to grow less clear. Their edges were becoming softer, more like shadows. The woman's dress and the child's shape were still there, but their color had now completely turned into that of an old, faded photograph, like the pictures of our grandparents' younger days that my mom kept in an old album at home. Seeing them like that made something cold spread from my chest into my arms and legs. I stopped running. My feet refused to move forward. It was as if my body suddenly realized something that my mind still resisted. All of a sudden I could feel goosebumps all over my skin. The hallway, which had felt just quiet before, now felt heavy and frozen, like time itself was being stretched. Despite my fear, my eyes could not look away. I watched as they reached the end of the hall and turned left. Everything in me screamed that it was not possible, because I knew that side led only to a closed staircase and a locked gate. That part of the building was off limits, and I had seen the metal barrier there many times before, always shut, a chain and padlock keeping it in place. But these two did not stop or hesitate. They turned left and disappeared from my view behind the corner as naturally as if they were just heading to another room. I hesitated where I stood, my mind full of confusion. A part of me wanted to run back to the classroom, go inside, lock the door, and hide. Another part of me was curious and stubborn, telling me to check, to prove to myself that I was only imagining things. After a few seconds that felt much longer, I forced myself to walk toward the end of the hallway. My legs felt stiff, like I was wading through water. The bag in my hand suddenly felt heavier, the strap cutting into my fingers. Every step echoed loudly in the empty corridor. The closer I got, the more I noticed how quiet it was. I could barely hear the distant noise from the gym anymore. It was as if this part of the building had been sealed off from the rest of the world. When I reached the corner and turned left, my heart jumped into my throat. The short corridor that led to the closed stairs was completely empty. There was no woman, no child, no movement at all. The gate at the top of the stairs was there, locked and still, the way I remembered it. There was no way anyone could have passed through there in just a few seconds, and even if they did, I would have heard the sound of the gate or footsteps going down the stairs. But there was nothing. Just silence and that heavy feeling in the air, pressing down on my shoulders. At that moment chills ran all over my body, from my neck down to my toes. My hands started to shake so much that I almost dropped the bag. I felt my throat tighten as if someone was squeezing it, and my mouth went dry. I knew I should run back, but my legs refused to listen, at least for a short while. It was like my whole body froze. I tried to open my mouth to shout, but no sound came out at first. Only air. I could feel my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I stood there, unable to move, staring at the empty corridor where the two figures should have been if they were real people. Seconds passed, maybe half a minute, I am not sure, but it felt like an eternity where everything around me stopped except the sound of my own heart inside my ears. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the invisible grip that held me seemed to loosen. I felt control return little by little to my arms and legs. My body grew lighter, and I could move again. Without thinking any more, I turned and ran back down the hallway, not even daring to look behind me. I just wanted to get back to the gym, to the noise, the lights, and the crowded safety of the bleachers and my classmates. The sound of my own footsteps hitting the floor sounded like someone else running after me, which only made me run faster. By the time I reached the stairs that led down toward the gym area, I was breathing hard, my chest tight, and my cheeks felt hot and cold at the same time. When I got back to the gymnasium and stepped inside, the noise hit me fully again, but this time it felt like a shield instead of something annoying. I rushed to where my class was sitting, and my teacher saw me right away. She noticed that my face was pale and that I was holding her bag with both hands, my fingers still trembling slightly. She asked me if I was okay, and I told her what happened in one nervous, messy rush of words. I described the long hallway, the woman and the child walking toward the closed stairs, how I ran after them, how their colors turned brown and then like an old photo, how they did not respond to me, how they disappeared around the corner, and how no one was there when I checked. As I talked, I could hear my voice shaking, and my classmates around us started to listen, their eyes wide. My teacher listened quietly, and when I finished, she did not laugh or tell me it was just my imagination. She did not say that I was just scared because of the stories I had heard before. Instead, she looked at me for a few seconds, then sighed and said that there were really ghosts in that part of the school. She said it in a calm way, as if it was something she already knew but did not want to talk about too much. She added that even the janitors and security guards had experienced odd things in that building, especially in the upper floors and the closed stairway. Sometimes they heard footsteps at night, doors opening and closing when nobody was there, or saw figures at the end of the hallway that disappeared when they approached. Hearing her say that, hearing a grown-up confirm that there was something strange there, made the hair on my arms stand up again. It was no longer just a child's imagination against the world, but something that even adults, who were supposed to explain everything, could not fully deny. That experience stayed with me as I grew older, even as I changed schools, graduated, and moved on with my life. I never completely forgot the feeling of standing in that empty corridor, holding my teacher's bag, watching two figures fade into the color of old photographs and vanish into a place where no one could have gone. Even now, as an adult, whenever I think about that 4th grade foundation day, I can still see that long hallway clearly in my mind and feel the same cold fear crawling slowly up my spine, reminding me that there are things in this world that we cannot explain, no matter how much we try.